Hey there, John Morris here, johnmorrisonline.com, and welcome to another episode of The John Morris Show. And in this episode, I'm going to be showing you how to create a Pinterest-like grid system inside of WordPress. And I'm going to show you how to do it using custom queries. So if you'd like to learn how to do those two things, be sure to stay tuned to the episode. This episode is sponsored by the Complete Web Developers course taught by Rob Percival on Udemy.com. Now, what I love about this course is first how comprehensive it is. It's 235 lectures on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, Bootstrap, WordPress, PHP, MySQL, APIs, and mobile apps. I mean, it's ridiculous. Second, I love how good of a teacher Rob is. As a former school teacher, Rob knows how to explain complex concepts in ways anyone can understand. And of course, the cool thing is I talked Rob into giving my audience an 85% discount on the course. So check the description of this video for a special link that contains a coupon code good for 85% off of the Complete Web Developers course by Rob Percival. Click that link and you'll be all set for the discount. Now, on to the episode. All right, so let's start off by taking a look at what we're actually going to be building. So that's what you're looking at here, and this is kind of a grid system that loops through the posts that are on this site and displays them here. So pretty straightforward. You can see that here the images are linked and the titles are linked. So if we click through here, then it's going to take us to that actual post that you see here. Now I've done this just in a kind of base generic theme because I didn't want to have all the theme styling get in the way of what we're trying to show here. All right, so this is what we're building here. I'm going to go ahead now and just kind of snap this over into half the screen so that we can look at the code and the display at the same time. Now, most of this is PHP code, so I'm not going to be using the inspector. I'm going to be using my actual text editor here. So we'll go ahead and run through this. One thing you'll notice, I haven't made this responsive. Wanted to kind of stick to more of the base PHP, but I did need to do some CSS in order to just kind of get some base styling here. Obviously, to use this, you would want to go ahead and make it responsive as well, so that maybe at this width it would only display 3 across instead of 5 across like this, and that would obviously look a lot better than this does here. All right, so with that all set up, let's then go ahead and talk about the actual plugin code. So what I did is, now you could do this, you could create this shortcode and do this inside of a theme functions file. That's entirely fine. Or you could do it inside of a plugin. Now, if you're not building in a full theme and integrating this into your theme, then I would suggest that you do this as a part of a plugin. But if you're building a full theme and you want to integrate this into it, then it would make complete sense to go ahead and include this in your theme. So I've done this as a plugin. And so I'm not going to worry about the plugin header stuff here. If you want to kind of research WordPress plugins on your own, you can kind of see what this different information is here. But this is the information that essentially makes this work inside of WordPress. All right, so with all that out of the way, now let's go ahead and dive in. I've created a class here called John Morris Grid. And so we're checking to see if the class exists. And if it doesn't, we're going to go ahead and create the class. Then inside of the class, I have first off an init function. So this is basically a method that's going to initialize everything that we need to have going on inside of the plugin. So here we have our add action. We're doing WP and Q scripts, and we're referencing a method inside of this class called enqueue, which you see down here. And so inside of enqueue, then we're doing WP and Q style, and this is the name of our style that we're enqueuing, JMO grid. And then this is the path to it. And so we're using the plugins URL function that's available on WordPress. We're passing in the path inside of our plugin folder, and then we're passing in this file constant, which kind of makes this plugin URL path thing work here. All right. So I'm not going to kind of go into the details of all of these different functions. You can look up plugins URL and it kind of explains it in detail. All right. Next is add image size. Now we need to do this because over here we're using kind of a very specific size for these kind of thumbnail pictures here. And when someone uploads to WordPress a picture for their post, the pictures could be all different sizes. In fact, these pictures that I uploaded, they were very, very different sizes, yet we need them to come here and display, the sizes pretty much identical across all of these. So we need WordPress to crop it for us, and we need it to crop it close to the dimensions that we're ultimately going to use. So in this particular case, 220 by 220, when this is at full width, that's about the right size. It's like 219 point something, which is the width of these little kind of grid items here. All right, so you'd, again, maybe play around with that depending on what you're ultimately building, if you're doing 5 across, 4 across, whatever the case may be. But 220 by 220, we set it to true so it does a hard crop instead of a proportional crop. Next, kind of the big thing is then we've added in our shortcode. The name of the shortcode is JMOGrid. Then it's referencing a method inside of this class called Shortcode Handler, which you'll see down here. All right, so all of this init stuff is stuff that we're going to have run, that hooks us into WordPress. Okay, so this is kind of the connection between our PHP code and WordPress. And if we come down here, you can see down here, this is where we actually hook it in. So we instantiate an instance of this class, so John Morris Grid equals new John Morris Grid, and we hook in here. We add action init. This is the WordPress hook init, which is generally where you're going to hook in. That does vary depending on what you're doing, but init is often a good one to hook in on. And then we are, what we're adding to that hook is our init method. So what this does is when this plugin is activated and a page loads, WordPress loads this file, and then inside this file our class gets instantiated, and we hook our init method in our class to the init hook in WordPress. So then when WordPress goes to process all of the functions and methods that have been hooked to init, our init method here inside of our class will run. And then that is where we add in even more hooks to different parts of WordPress that we need to hook into. Mainly we're creating our shortcode here so that our shortcode, when we drop it into a page, will actually work and run. Right? So again, if you're not familiar with WordPress, there's a WordPress loading kind of architecture or a certain process that it goes through when it loads. So it's going to start off, init is essentially loads before things like add shortcode and all these others here. Okay, so that's essentially what we're doing. We're hooking our code into WordPress. Now, as I mentioned here, our shortcode, we're referencing the method Shortcode Handler. So inside here, this is really just kind of a buffer function, and really it creates a buffer between what's getting passed to our shortcode handler and our actual kind of grid method down here where we build out the grid. Now you could technically call grid directly up here, but it's oftentimes a good practice to have this kind of shortcode handler buffer function here so that in case you need to do something with the attributes that get passed to your shortcode, you can kind of do that here and keep it clean, and then pass whatever you need to pass. Once you've kind of figured out what how all of this is getting processed, then you can pass that to your actual method that's going to process whatever it is that you're building. Okay, so in this case, it's somewhat redundant, but when you have more complex plugins and shortcodes that you're creating, then this becomes a valuable resource here. So I just always kind of build it because I know that oftentimes the plugins I build, I'm going to continue to develop, and this will become more complex over time. All right, so inside of this, it gets past this ats array. Now this is a collection of the attributes that you specify in the WordPress shortcode. So if we actually, let's go ahead and open up our page here where we have our shortcode kind of posted in here, and I can show you this real quick. All right, so we have it in a page, and it is the grid page. And once we get inside here, you can see that what we have here is our shortcode pasted in JMO grid. Now, you can add attributes to this. So for example, you could say, maybe do order by, and then something like date or whatever. I don't remember offhand what WPQuery takes, but you can add these kinds of attributes. Well, what WordPress does is it automatically processes these for you and passes them to your Shortcode Handler as an array. And that's what this ats array is here. All right, so again, when you get this ats, it's going to be an array of all of these. So it'll be basically an associative array, key value pairs. So what we do with that then is you drop that into the shortcode ats function. And what this does is allows us to specify defaults, but have those defaults overridden. So for example, you'll see here in shortcode ats, then I specify an array here. This is an array of the defaults. So I have posts per page set to 100. Well, I could come in here to my shortcode and do posts per page, and I could do, let's say, 300. If I did that, this 300 would override this 100. So now it would query and find 300 posts instead of 100. However, if I don't specify a value here, then it will default to what I've set here. So this is the default, but it can be overridden by the attributes that you set inside of the shortcode. Okay, this shortcode ats function is what does that. It kind of handles all of that for you. So you specify inside, you'll notice inside this function we're specifying an array, and it's array of the defaults that we want. Then we're specifying what we're referencing, or the arguments that are being passed in from our shortcode here, so that we know we basically have an array of our defaults, and we have an array of what was passed through the shortcode. And then we have this JMO grid. Now this is optional, but essentially what this does is it creates a hook, or I believe it's a filter, that other plugins can hook into, and they could actually filter this themselves. So it's optional, but it's a good practice to allow other people to extend what you've built here. All right, so that's what we're doing inside of our shortcode handler. And then once we've done all that processing, then we're just doing a return, and we're passing it to our grid method inside of this class, and we're passing our arguments to it. Okay, so now if we come down here to our grid method, now we have our arguments that have been gone through shortcode ats. They've been passed from our page here. They've gone through the defaulting and all that stuff. Now we have our clean arguments that we can use here. Now in this particular case, we're simply passing those arguments into WPQuery. So what that means is this plugin right now, as it stands, if you wanted to use it, I haven't gone through and done a ton of development on it. I wrote this in probably about 30 minutes. But if you did want to use it, and I'll tell you at the end of the video how to get access to the source code. But if you did want to use it, you could pass anything as a parameter in the shortcode ats that the WPQuery object or class will accept. And so you can kind of look that up and see what it will accept, and you can pass any of that to this. Right, so that allows you to kind of modify the display that you get over here on the front page. Maybe you could limit to 5 posts, or maybe you don't want to do posts. Maybe you have a custom post type that you want to show, or maybe you want to order it differently. Maybe you want a descending order or ascending order. Maybe you want to order it by date, or maybe you want to order it by title. All that stuff you can do because we're passing these arguments ultimately through to our WPQuery that we do here. All right, so then in this WPQuery, what this is actually doing is querying WordPress based on the arguments that we've passed. Now, we've only passed this post per page argument, so it's going to use its default, which is it's going to find posts, it's going to order by date, it's going to order in reverse chronological order, and so forth. So those are all the defaults that it's going to use, but this is ultimately going to do the query that actually grabs our posts from the database. So what we're doing is we're instantiating a new instance of WPQuery, passing in our args, and setting the result as this grid variable here. Now this is the recommended way of doing this. You can use get posts, and that's just fine. You don't want to use query posts. Query posts is for altering the main query, and even then you don't want to use query posts. It's pre-get posts filter, I believe, is what you want to use. But for something like this, where we're creating a kind of custom query inside of a page, you want to, generally it's recommended that you instantiate a new instance of WPQuery. All right, so that's what we've done here. Then here we are starting our output buffer. Now the reason that I do this is because with shortcodes, you don't want to echo anything. You want to return it. It causes issues if you echo it. But I like to write my HTML code. I don't want to have to. Write that code inside of PHP. It's kind of tedious to do that. So you'll notice down here that I have raw HTML code in here. I'm closing PHP, writing HTML code, and then opening it back up. This is something that you may be familiar with that you can do. But if I did this and I didn't have an output buffer, then this would be echoed essentially back to the page here and cause issues. So I want to be able to return it. So what I do is turn on an output buffer. So that's going to keep all of this code from being echoed, and it's actually going to be stored in a buffer. And then you'll notice here at the end I call return obgetClean, which essentially is going to get the contents of the output buffer and then clean out the buffer, and that's what gets returned from this function. So basically it allows me to write my PHP code like this, or my HTML code like this, without having to put it inside of PHP, but still return it at the end of this function so I don't cause issues over here. This is fairly common thing that you'll see done with WordPress developers, is use an output buffer in this way. All right, so that's what we're turning on, the output buffer here. So ob start. Then we're setting up our grid here. So I wrap everything inside of a grid. So all of this is wrapped inside of a grid, and that's just so that I can A, reference it in CSS if I need to do that, but B, make it because we're doing tiles like this, you can have issues where, for example, this comments are closed. If I only had 9 posts and this one wasn't here, this might float up alongside here. So I just wrap it all inside of kind of a container, and then I set this container so nothing can float up alongside of it. So it makes it a little bit easier for handling grid type stuff like this. All right, next then what I'm doing is I'm actually starting my loop. So if you're familiar with the WordPress loop, this should look somewhat familiar to you. If not, then you may want to do a little bit of research on the WordPress loop, but here we're doing a custom loop. So remember, we instantiated new instances of WPQuery and saved it in this grid variable. Now you'll see I'm doing if grid have post, while grid have post, grid the post. And so when you do a custom query like this, you need to reference what the variable that you instantiated here. Okay, so what this is doing is it's checking to see, okay, our query that we made here, does it have posts? Are there actually posts in it? If yes, then while it has posts, we're going to set up our post object, and then we're going to run all of this code inside of here. Okay, what this allows you to do is it allows you to use functions like if has post thumbnail, the permalink, just like you would inside of a main WordPress loop or a normal WordPress loop. But because we've set it up here, it's going to be whatever our custom query is here. All right, so that's what we're doing here, is setting up our loop. I am also setting this count variable to a value of 1, and we're going to use that. I'll kind of show you how we use that. It has to do with the display of these and kind of making these display a little bit nicer. All right, so that's starting the loop. And then you'll notice that down here, this is where we end the loop. Okay, so when we end the loop, we're going to unset class, which I'll talk about here in a minute. We're going to increment our counter. So it starts at count equals 1. After the first post, it'll become count equals 2, count equals 3, 4, 5, etc. So we need that counter for what we're doing with this modulus and this class here, which I'll explain here in just a minute. Then here we're ending our while loop. So we said while grid have posts. Here we're ending that, so end while. We're resetting our post data, which we need to do when we create a custom query like this. It just kind of resets everything so that it doesn't cause any funkiness throughout the rest of the page. And then we end our if statement. So if grid have posts, then now we're doing our end if down here. All right, so this line opens the loop and this line closes the loop. All right, now inside of the loop, so that's essentially for each one of these items, this is what we're going to do. First, we're going to figure out what's called a modulus. Now, I'm going to go ahead and inside here, I'm going to echo this modulus, and I'm going to show you what we're doing with this. So if we refresh this here, then you'll notice that we get these numbers here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, right? And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. You'll notice that it's not like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is what count by itself would do. If you echoed count, it would just count them up. The modulus allows us to essentially create kind of pseudo rows, right? So the modulus is we're doing count modulus 5. So basically what this is it's the count divided by 5. What's the remainder? Okay, so it's the remainder of dividing these numbers. So, for example, if you do 5 divided by 5, well, the remainder there is 0, right? So the important thing is that you'll notice that this one in the first position and this one in the first position are the same, and this one in the last position and this one in the last position for each row are the same. That's what we're after. We want each kind of row to have the same count here, because then what we can do is what we do right here. So we check to see if the modulus is equal to 1, right? So it's equal to 1 on just the first one in each row. If it is, then we're setting the variable class to first. Makes sense, right? So we want to know which ones are the first in each row that we have here. Then we're doing else if. So if it's not equal to 1, then we want to see if it's equal to 0. So here it's equal to 0. In the last position it's equal to 0. And we're setting class variable to a value of last. So we want to know the first and last item in each row because we're going to alter them a little bit. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to add a class to those items. So we've determined if we have a first item or a last item, and we've set the value of class accordingly. Now down here inside of our grid item, you can see we have div class equals jmo grid-item. We're also echoing our class. So if we look at these, you'll see that this one has a class of first. This has just the regular class here, same, and then this one has last. If you'll notice, the first one, it's the orange up here that you'll see when I hover over it. On the left, it's not there. And if you look on this one, on the right, it's not there. And if you look on these middle ones, it has margin on both sides. That's essentially what this is allowing us to do so that we can get this to line up nice and even with the left side and nice and even with the right side here. Okay, so we're adding the class of first and last to the appropriate item so that we can style it accordingly. That's what all of that is for. Maybe a little bit of overkill, and you don't have to do that. But I wanted to show that, A, because I'm picky, and B, I know that a lot of people want to try and do that kind of thing. And now there are different ways that you could do this. Instead of adding a class, you could actually wrap this whole kind of row here inside of a div and call it a row. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can handle this. This happens to just be the one that I picked for this particular scenario. All right, so now we've got our div class equals JMO item, which is where most of the styling for this is done. We're adding our first and last class appropriately, and then let me go ahead and get rid of echoing this modulus because we don't need that anymore. Then we're checking to see if the post has a post thumbnail. So we're calling the hasPost thumbnail function inside of WordPress. It'll just return true or false if it does or does not have a thumbnail. And then inside of here, we're calling the post thumbnail to display it, and we're passing in the name of the image size that we created up here, JMO grid. So it's going to use that image size here, right? So that's what this does. This is for the image. Now we've wrapped all of that. This the post thumbnail is going to create the entire image tag, just so you know. So you don't have to do the image tag here. It creates the entire image tag with all the classes. If we look at this here, and then we'll see our image tag has our width, has our URL. You'll see it has all the classes, the alt text, everything. This kind of handles all of that for you. Then we're wrapping that inside of an anchor tag so that it's clickable. It links. So the href is using the permalink function inside of WordPress. Right, so if it has post thumbnail, we're doing all that, and then we're ending that. Then we are creating an h4 tag for the titles. Again, that's, you can change that. You don't have to use h4 tags. You could use something else if you wanted. We have our anchor tag linked to the permalink so that the title is linked. And then inside of it, normally for things like you may have seen the title, so a function called the title, which you could certainly use here. But I wanted to actually edit the length of this test, or at least show you how you can edit the length of the title and the description down here and so forth. So you'll notice on some of these, for example, like this one, that's the full title. This is the full title. But here, now getting into another, and then you see it has ... That's what WPTrimWords does. It allows you to trim the amount of words in a string of text, and you'll see I'm trimming it to just 6 words. So that makes it so that these don't get too crazy long, and most of the titles are at least 6 words, so they're not going to be all dramatically different lengths here. That was why I did that. Now, if you don't care about that, you of course don't have to do this. But when you use WPTrimWords, you can't use just the title. You have to use get the title, because the title actually echoes, and so it won't be trimmed, and it'll cause you a bunch of issues. So you call get the title, and that'll just get it so that you can use it inside of PHP here. All right, so that's the title. And then we have our MetaClass here, so written by John Morris, July 15, 2015. And you can see we're echoing, we're using the _e here, so that allows this text to be modified. People can change the language of it. So, if you're Dutch and you want this in Dutch, you can actually modify this written by to be in Dutch using the Mo and Po files and all that. That's a whole nother tutorial. But this makes it so that it's capable of doing that. So written by, you need to use your text domain here, which is what you set up here. It says text domain John Morris -grid. You do that same thing. You use that same text domain when you use this e underscore here. All right, so written by, and then the author. So this is the author function, and it will output depending on what that particular author has set up in their bio. So if you have your display name set, then it'll use your display name. If you don't, then it will just use your username here. So I don't have my display name set on my local here, so it's just using my username. All right, then we have a break tag, and then we have we're displaying the date. So we're echoing get the date and get option date format. So you need to use get the date in a loop like this, because if you use just the date, which is a WordPress function, it will only, if these posts are on the same day, it'll only display the date for the first one. Don't ask me why. I don't know why that is. It's kind of weird, but it is what it is. So if you want the date to display on every post reliably, you need to call getTheDate, and then you pass in the date format that you want to use. Now you can specify your own format, and it's just like the PHP date function. It takes the same formats. Or you can call getOption date format, and that will use the date format that you have specified in your WordPress settings. This is probably the one that you're going to want to use, unless you want to specify a different format for this particular grid than you use everywhere else on your site. Then you would actually format this. If you're redistributing this to people, this is pretty much what you're going to want to use here. All right, so that does the date, and then finally we have our description here. And so we have, again, echoing WPTrimWords. In this instance, we're passing in get the content, and we're trimming it down to just 10 words so that we only have 10 words that show up here. Again, for the same reason that I did it on the title. All right, so then again down here, we're ending our loop here, and now you can see why I unset class, because I set class here. If I don't unset it, when it loops through this first one and figures this out, when it goes to the second one, class will be set, and so it'll actually echo out whatever it determined here. In that case, it would be setting class to first. It would actually add that to all of these. So you need to unset it at the end of each loop so that it doesn't kind of carry over to the next iteration. And then, as I mentioned, I'm returning this in ob-getClean. All right, so that's how to actually make the loop and loop through everything and have it display on your site here. Now, the last thing then that I'll cover is just a little bit of the CSS here. So if we go into style.css, then you can see it's really kind of straightforward. We take the JMO grid, which is the wrapper for everything. I just do overflow, hidden, and clear both. That's so nothing down here is going to float up alongside of it here. Then we have JMO grid item, which is basically each one of these items, kind of the default styling for each item. Overflow hidden, I've set the box sizing to border box so that when we use our percentage width down here, we don't have any funkiness with that. Now I've set the width to 18%. The reason I've done that is because we have 5 items here. So if you add up, if you divide 100% width by 5 items, that'd be 20%. However, we have a margin in between each one here, right? That margin is 1% on the left and the right. So 1% margin here, 1% margin here. So if you add those up, 18 plus 1 plus 1, that gives you the 20% that you're after here. So that's why I've done this. Float left, as I said, margin, I've just added a margin of 20 pixels on the top and bottom. That could be whatever. The 1% that I talked about. I have a border 1 pixel solid, E4, E4, E4. And again, this is why you use box sizing, because all of this width and this margin adds up across the board to 100%. But if I add a border of 1 pixels, that would put us over 100%, and it would cause this one to drop down to the bottom here. Okay, so the box sizing kind of alleviates that. I've also done a border radius of 3 pixels. So you see here, there's a little bit of a kind of curve around here. And that's also why I need to do the overflow hidden, so that the image up here will curve with the box. If you don't do that, the image will actually kind of overlay this corner, and you won't get this corner like you want. All right, next is item.first. So that applies this styling to these first items in each row here. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm just getting rid of the margin on the left. So if I didn't do that, this item here would actually start about right here, and so it would be off kind of kilter with the edge of this grid section here. Again, that's probably being a little bit picky, but I just like the way it looks a little bit better. But now that we're doing that, we're getting rid of that margin, which was 1%. Now we need to make the width of that item 19% so that we still have our 100% width across the whole thing here. It's really the same idea with item.last, which affects these last items, except instead of getting rid of the margin on the left, we're getting rid of the margin on the right of that item. Then the rest of this is really just kind of, my personal preference in styling. So we're styling the H4 and paragraph tags here. We're styling the H4 by itself, the paragraph tag by itself, and then the meta here. This is all really kind of up to you. You don't have to use what I did here. You maybe want to come through and change some of this, make this bigger, make this smaller, make it a different color, etc., etc. So there's really nothing special about any of this down here. Now, if you like this video, be sure to like it so that I know this is the kind of content that you're after. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my tutorials. And if you have a suggestion for a future tutorial, go ahead and let me know in the comments, and I will try to get that done for you. This particular tutorial was the result of a comment that someone left me, so I do pay attention. I do make tutorials based off of what you say. Now, if you want to get access to this source code, then the way to do that is to head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/resources, or if you're on my website, you can simply click the resources tab right up here, and that will take you to my web developer resources page. Now, I have all kinds of web developer resources on here, from classes to the different tools that I use. But if you scroll down to the bottom here, then you'll see a section called Code Snippets, and you'll see PHP Code Snippets, WordPress Code Snippets, and Genesis Code Snippets. So you can go ahead and click on through to the code snippets that apply for the video you're watching, and you'll be able to get access to that code snippet. Now, if we click here, for example, on PHP Code Snippets, then we will be taken to that page, and you'll see all of the different code snippets here, and you can click through and you'll get the video, you'll get the description, and you'll get the code snippet as well. So again, head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/resources. Head on down to the code snippets section to get access to the snippet that you're after. Of course, while you're here, you might as well look around and see some of the other developer tools and courses that I have available here that are going to help you down your path of becoming a web developer. And since I'm constantly adding to this page, then you might as well bookmark this page and check back often so you can see all of the things that I've added and get access to all of the tools and snippets and courses and things that I'm using throughout my career. All right, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.